Hello, hello. All of you magical, beautiful beings who are watching these 21 days of fear. We are now on day 20, which means we have one more day to go tomorrow. And if you are just tuning in today for the first day, there are 19 videos that have come before this one, and you can watch those over on IGTV or on my YouTube page or on Facebook. So today's topic is all about how we learn fear, the learned sensation of fear. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about all the ways that fear shows up in our lives that we might not be recognizing immediately and tracing it back to, oh, this being a fear. And we talked about what fear is, fear being anything that takes us out of our truth, anything that takes us out of the love of our soul, the purity, and distorts our reality, filters our reality in ways that keep us in protection mode. So to go into the last 2 days now is all about going into really how this process of fear comes in and creates the procrastination and the hesitation and the instability in relationships and the stress and the anxiety and all the things that we've been talking about. So when we're talking about the learned sensation of fear, how do we learn what to fear? We learn it through our experiences. So it's through what we are experiencing that we pick up the stories of what to fear, who to fear, how to live, where we need to protect ourselves, all the things that need to happen in order for XYZ to take place. And the learning of this gets programmed and conditioned into our brain. It gets hardwired into our neurology. And the earlier that we learn these fears, it actually goes in and stunts the development of our brain, where the parts of our brain through these developmental phases don't connect completely in the way that they would if we didn't have this learned experience of fear that comes in through some form of trauma. Whether that trauma is very obvious or that trauma is as simple as you were unable to cry for what you needed, or you were not heard, or maybe the birth was too fast, or the birth was too slow, or you lost oxygen in the birth, like all the things that happen in these stages of our development. So as we're learning the fears, right, as we're in this process of learning fears, it goes in and it actually stunts the development of our brain. So our birth trauma stunts the development of the connection between our medulla and our pons, right? These are the lower, I say lower because they're literally in the back hind, we call it the hindbrain. This area that we know as the reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of our brain. As our species has evolved forward, we continue to develop higher and higher functionings of our brain, of this quantum computer. So our hindbrain is what gives us our sense of survival, and that's what it's really focused on. So when we have developmental challenges in our hindbrain that come through early onset trauma, through birth trauma, through all the things, through when birth trauma happens, it's because ancestral stories are being passed forward through the womb, through the birthing process, through the way we enter into this world. And that shapes then our medulla, and then that shapes then the development of our pons, which is where a lot of the traumas that create long-standing stress, anxiety, depression, excuse me, and all of the other things that we have been talking about, the mental disturbances, the physical disturbances, the feeling like living on the edge, right? Living in this constant fight or flight or freeze mode, living in that sympathetic dominance where our bodies just can't relax. And when we can't relax, we're not as able to receive all that wants to be given to us. And we overcompensate in giving. And one symptom of trauma that is within our pawns is the symptom of poverty or an inability to financially provide for one's needs. Because this is that part of the brain that is directly controlling how our needs are being met. So any experience that creates a fear response is going to essentially create, in these first several months of our lives, the first 14 months of our lives, when these parts of our brain are developing, anything that comes in and is received by our nervous system and by our brain as a threat to our ability to thrive, and that could be our needs not being met, crying out and no one was able to be there because our parents were working multiple jobs, or the birthing trauma that takes place, all the things that we might not even think were traumatic. We just were like, yeah, that's just a part of life. You know, it's a part of living in this modern world, being born into hospitals with all the things and being immediately poked and prodded by all the things. You know, we don't necessarily account them as traumatic. That being said, our body takes them in as that and immediately goes into the defense mode. And then the development of our brain is stunted. Certain pathways that need to be connected in order for us to feel like we are able to have our needs met. And also the pons is controlling our central nervous system. So long-standing fight, flight, freeze, long-standing stress and anxiety and tension is oftentimes a really great signal that there is developmental things happening in the pons, that chances are in that stage of 7 to 14 months of your life, something was going on that was stunting that growth. Maybe it was that you weren't able to crawl around as much as you needed to in order for those synapses to be completely connected. And then we just build on top of dysfunctions in our neurology. And what ends up happening for a lot of us is that we compensate in other parts of our brain. For me, I compensated in my cerebral functioning, where I developed far advanced perceptual abilities in the upper parts of my brain. And through this overdevelopment, it became this focus in on cognition, right? On knowing, on learning, whilst because it was essentially compensating for the damage that happened in the hindbrain in those preformative years of life. So essentially, when we're looking at fear, we're looking at our learned experience from the reality and how this then impacts our development. And given that the majority of people are in a state of stress, anxiety, chronic pain, depression, I keep saying the stats, like depression is the #1 reason that people are on disability in the United States. Like that is huge. It's not because of any physical disability, it's because of a mental disability, which means that something is happening in the brain, something was not formulated properly in the brain, or the brain is compensating for a trauma that has taken place. Now, the thing about these parts of the brain is they do not have a language in the way that our cognitive parts of our brain do. Whereas the cortex and the cerebral parts of our brain, they can talk things through and they can, be very conscious about the process of talk therapies and working things out and learning more about what's happening, and having a cognitive awareness about the trauma and whatever is creating the symptoms that are constantly showing up in your life. That being said, in order to actually heal the cause, we have to go back, literally back in our brain, to the source of where the imbalances are. And those parts of our brain do not understand spoken language or anything that is understood by our cortex and by the higher parts of our brain that understand language. So a lot of our efforts to heal our brain are usually involving, a lot of the fields of psychiatry is all, talking, working things out, going through these processes, and none of that actually gets to the parts of our brain that are usually holding on to the core imbalances that then the RAS, the reticulating activating system that is located in the pons part of the brain, located in the brainstem, that then starts to look for more ways to be in the trauma. The trauma patterns keep repeating because it's picked up at such a young age. Now, I'm not one to be, well, let's say I am one, or better yet, say it this way, to see how certain systems that are in place to ensure that humanity stays in the fear paradigm are there so that we get this early onset trauma. And one of them is the way that children are being born into the world. C-sections, things like this. Like, we're starting to see that people with these C-sections, they are having developmental issues in their brain. People that are born too fast or born too slow, or they come in and immediately are brought into this super white, sterile environment, and people are immediately poking and prodding at them. We're seeing that this is actually our body receiving an original trauma imprint. So that when that happens right away at birth, that then stunts our brain's developmental growth. And when our brain's developmental growth in these hindbrain, these are the areas that we're holding on to our fear response. When that is damaged, when it is not developed in the way it's supposed to, or there was actual literal damage to it through, possibly something happened in the birth canal and something was compressed and things like that happen, maybe oxygen deprivation happened at a certain part of the breathing journey, maybe the umbilical cord wrapped around the neck. There's so many things that happen in the birthing experience. So, being born into the system that we've created around birth is designed almost to traumatize us, so that we are staying in this fear way of approaching the world. Because as I've said in other videos, we are so much more able to be controlled, and we give away our power to something outside of ourselves, giving it the illusion that it's going to protect us when we are in trauma, when we are in protection mode of our body. So in the path of actually healing the fears, healing the stress, healing the anxiety, healing all of these deep, deep core imbalances, we have to go and first start with rebirthing the hindbrain, and then moving forward from there, literally going through every developmental stage of our life and course correcting, creating neural pathways that weren't created appropriately, and bringing harmony into areas that had developed damage, possibly if there was any blows to the head throughout childhood. I know I had several traumatic brain injuries from being really, really active in sports and riding horses and all the things that, essentially led me on this path of curating all of this information and putting it together into a program that actually takes people through this process of going back to the core and rebuilding our bodies. Because that is what I see as the only way for us to shift into a world of peace, is to go back and to address all of the imbalances and the dysfunctions and build our bodies again, right? So I'm just going to tune into, hi Sonia, some comments here. She says, plus circumcision and vaccines. Yeah, absolutely. And these things that, you know, immediately come through and our penises are snipped and we receive like, what, 70 something plus vaccinations? Needle, 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 put all these poisons inside of our body. Like, that is so traumatic to our teeny tiny little human form that's trying to like make sense of this world. It's like immediately comes in and it realizes, oh shit, did I really want to be here? Like, this place is kind of crazy. Why would you do that to this body? And yeah, Sonia's showing here that her she has a twin and the cord wrapped. Absolutely. This is something that happens, right? Things happen when we're being born, and these things, we don't think about it because we're like, yeah, it's our birth. We don't really remember it necessarily. And birth it's only now starting to be seen in new ways, where we're starting to see that maybe the way we've been birthing children isn't necessarily in the highest alignment. That being said, like, it goes even further to, well, what is actually happening for, like, we think about the mom, right? Okay, what's the mom going through as she's pushing a baby through her whole reproductive system and out her vagina, right? Well, what's happening to that baby as it's coming through very teeny tiny narrow passageways, when it's dropping and coming through and literally falling out of the mother and being pushed and pressed through these contractions, right? Contractions that are pushing. They're that painful for the mother in a grown woman's body. Have we given thought to what that might feel like for the actual baby that's coming through that pressure tunnel, right? It creates, it does things. And honestly, the higher evolution, once we are no longer in ancestral wounding and ancestral karma and needing to pass these disturbances forward, the birth process will completely change, because ultimately this deep karma that we've not fully processed as humans, that just keeps getting passed forward, we almost need that initial like jar to our system to come through and come into this disoriented world and be able to do the healing work to transcend that karma. That being said, the evolution forward, when we are sovereign and we are no longer relating through karma, and we're no longer carrying on generations of pain and dis-ease, the birthing process will actually change. You know, higher evolved species that don't live necessarily on the earth plane, there isn't even a process of it coming through a woman's body, right? In the androgynous planes, which is the higher next evolution, where there's no longer the need for the appearance of there being a separation through gender. So from that standpoint, we can see that the birthing process and the trauma that gets picked up there does serve a part of the process, because it helps us to heal. That being said, it is not the end journey, right? There's so much more that we can become and evolve beyond if we actually go through and start to, once we have been born, and recognize the patterns for dis-ease and anxiety and stress and depression and all of the things that are just running rampant on this planet right now. We recognize that, okay, this is the message, that there is something in me that is to be healed, so that I can be a vehicle that brings through a soul that is not traumatized, so that we can begin to birth in a whole new human species that is not plugged in to this pain body collective. So there's so much available. And you know, to just bring it back to those of us who are in adult bodies, because this is all the people who are watching, there is a process that we can go through to go back and to rebirth our brain and to move forward so that we can rewrite our future. Because right now, our future is dependent on who we are being in this moment. And if in this moment we have trauma that is unhealed, pain, chronic pain, dis-ease, anxiety, mental disturbances, emotional disturbances, then that is going to be the foundation of the being that we become in the future, unless in the present we show up and we acknowledge that there is room for us to heal and grow, and we reach out into the ethers and we pull in the resources and the tools and the support that are going to help us to rebuild our body, no longer held into the trauma pain body matrix. I love this. Sonia just shares that her close friend did home births and no vaccinations and breastfed until 2, and her daughter was recently accepted to Stanford on a full ride. Brilliant child, unfucked with, right? Which just shows us what is available to us. Like, we are so magical and miraculous, and there's so much more for us than relating through our trauma. And it's up to us individually to be a part of that through healing and integrating. So if you are just tuning in today, to day 20, there's 19 videos that have come before this talking about fear, talking about trauma, talking about stress and anxiety and depression and PTSD and mental disturbances and diseases of the body and symptoms in our reality, like jobs that we hate and relationships that are toxic and lifestyle choices that don't have very clear boundaries, and all the ways that these disturbances are manifesting in our lives and what we can do about that to actually heal ourselves. Tomorrow we have the last day of this video series, and if you're just tuning in, really do go back and start watching some of those videos. There's so much in them to support you, to support humanity in really starting to see with clear eyes what has been happening and how we can effectively heal ourselves. And with that, the Fearlessly Expressed program is all about rebuilding from the foundation, rebirthing our brain, initiating our nervous system, bringing health and harmony to our whole bodies, building up from the foundations, using some of the most advanced technologies that we have that help us to access these parts of ourselves, along with the exact systems and steps that help us to get into these parts of our brain that otherwise are very complicated and challenging to get into because we take cerebral approaches to areas of our brain that don't understand language as we know it. So if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to send me a message or go to the link in my bio to read about the program. We begin January 1st. Again, I'm Hamna. If this is your first video of the 21 days, go watch the rest of them on my Facebook page or on Instagram TV. You can also find them uploaded on YouTube if you like to watch at faster speed, and my YouTube page is at Rainbow Jones. So much love and appreciation to all of you. If you resonate with this video, like it, heart it, share it, tag your friends in it. I appreciate you helping me to get out the word on what is happening and how we can all show up to be responsible beings choosing to heal so that we can create a human species that is no longer living through trauma. So much love to you all. Bye.